NAPE is delighted to present to you Leigh Hoath, Professor of Science Education at Leeds Trinity University.
Think about these and you might want to make some notes. And I will make no apology, these are quite hard questions. Okay? But, first one, explain the difference between climate and weather. What is the definition of net zero? And what mitigations can you state that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes and I'll explain why I'm giving you these questions after you've answered them. This survey was released in the back end of last year, climate literacy among school leaders. So this is 16-year-olds who were asked about this. And 31% of them could define the difference between weather and climate. 31%. Okay? 44% were able to select the correct definition of climate change from multiple choice. They're not even being asked to write these. So we've got a bit of an issue here where our children leaving school, young people at 16, cannot really answer these questions. Only 1 in 5 could identify the correct meaning of net zero. Okay? And that, you sort of go, well, actually, does it matter? Well, it does if that is what, as a society and as a government and as a population we are moving towards the real target. If we don't understand what it is that we're aiming for, how are we ever going to get there? So, you can compare your answers again, I'm not going to pick on anybody here, but climate is average conditions over a longer period of time. The weather is the here and now, it's cold outside or it's raining or it's a beautiful spring day. Okay, that climate is taken over a period of time. So 31% there, you can see where the others fell. So it's interesting because actually we talk about this with our year ones. And I think if we were to ask 6-year-olds, they might be able to answer this question a little bit better than our 16-year-olds, and that says something about the sequencing of our curriculum and what we're teaching and where our emphasis lies. The meaning of net zero. So it's that balancing of human emissions and removals of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay? So it's not a particularly complicated definition, but actually there's a heck of a lot of understanding that has to go behind that. We need to know about how carbon dioxide is being produced, we need to know about the carbon cycle, we need to know how it can be removed, we need to know what we're doing that has that impact, which then brings all those mitigations. But this, this sense of this is a word that we are working towards, and 40% of our 16-year-olds aren't even prepared to have a guess. So, mitigations, I'm going to put you to a little test here. So you're going to answer these questions here, just choose, you've got a 50-50 chance. Which of these reduces greenhouse gas emissions more? Recycling or eating a vegan or plant-based diet? Living without using a car or without a pet dog? And using low energy bulbs or eating again a vegan or plant-based diet? First one, it is not recycling, and yet we go into schools and all we hear is we are doing lots of recycling. It's the one that's boxed. Okay? So the vegetarians, the vegans in the room, you are making a really positive contribution here. So one of the things that's really important is the plant-based diet actually mitigates greenhouse gases more than all of these other things. But the point is here, the recycling one is really problematic because in schools, this is what we hear. I am recycling, we're doing more of this, we've got more recycling bins. So what? It does not make a difference in terms of greenhouse gases. Yes, it does in terms of circularity, but do not conflate recycling and mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. Right, the second one. It's time to kill the dog. Amy's not happy. Amy's got 3 of them. Okay, so I will say on this, if you've got a little dog, you're doing better than those of you who might have, say, 2 Labradors or a Spaniel. Okay? Pets have a significant carbon footprint. Okay? think about that. We really don't like to think about it because they're our companions, they live with us. We do not want to sacrifice that for the sake of the planet. And that's the reality. All of this comes into compromise and making those decisions. To go back to what the purpose of education is it about making critical decisions? Is it about environmental stewardship? Is it about making those really informed ways of thinking? Well, actually, they're going to be tough for you. We've worked this out in our house because we have guinea pigs and hamsters. We're okay. They don't do much. Okay, so that's a really interesting one. So like I say, it's not clear cut in terms of, size of dog does make a difference and all of that. But it's a really interesting discussion, isn't it? Am I going to have a car or am I going to have that pet dog? Amy's now walking to work. That's fun. Okay, and 3, again, consensus with plant-based diet. Using low energy bulbs does help. But not anywhere near as much as that diet. So it's really, again, it's just thought-provoking, isn't it? So these are the facts that our 16-year-olds are leaving school thinking about. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Hinterland, and this is a bit I don't know, contentious in some ways, but what I want to do is position this in a way that helps us to think about climate change and perhaps the other things that we are teaching in and around our national curriculum. So we've got this core knowledge, the bit that we can see of this tree. What is it that we need our children and young people to know? Now, whether that's about climate change, whether that's about science, whether it's about geography, history, art. Okay? We have got that core bit of knowledge. But beneath that, there's a whole lot of stuff goes on when we're teaching. So if we think about actually how are we contextualising that, how are we doing it in a way that deepens that understanding? What are the experiences that we're giving our children and young people? How are we providing motivation for them to learn? How are we making those connections with the abstract world? All of these things are really, really difficult to measure, and that then becomes a problem because in school, at the moment, we're all about the measurement. Okay? At that top level, we're not as teachers. What we actually want is the best for our children and young people and to give them experiences that will develop them as individuals. Let's go back to our purpose of education. It doesn't mention anything about accountability and attainment in there, does it? But this actually, there's a whole load of stuff here that we can do, that we can enact with our children and young people. So what it might look like, collective action is really important, so we don't have children feeling like everything is their responsibility. But self-regulation, this is a really challenging part of what they are experiencing in life at the moment. I'll come on to that again in a minute or two. But developing that sense of well-being and being able to articulate the challenges that they feel is a really important part of their lives. And we do it with other things. When we talk to them, relationships. So, but it's the sense of all of those things that we deal with as teachers, those tricky conversations. We enable them to articulate their thinking, don't we, and be able to share. So we need to be able to do it in the context of some of our curriculum content or our learning. And about how do we contextualise it. So we know that there are different cultural perspectives around climate change. We know that there are impacts on different communities, not just global north, global south, but actually mirrored within those communities. So something to think about actually. We don't just go back to what I said earlier, we don't just teach them the facts. We don't just teach them the skills, we do a whole lot more underneath that. When you actually unpack what you do as a teacher, it can be quite a scary thing. So, scientific literacy, as I've had on to, I think is really, really important. That doesn't just come from teaching science, it's models throughout the curriculum. So, thinking about how do we use new words, how do we make sure that if actually we are going to talk about climate and weather, that they are modelled appropriately in what we're saying. About creating the context. How are we actually making sure that the context is familiar to those children so that they can then apply it to unfamiliar settings? But not being shy of that. We need to expose them to the vocabulary that they need to be able to understand something like climate change with some ambition. Do not underestimate what your children and young people are capable of. And I might have said this to you before, but people shy away from using scientific language. And I'll go, why? Speak to your average 3-year-old about dinosaurs, they can use big words. They know what they are, they know those names, they can group, they can classify, they can make sense of that. But making connections between words and context, and I think that's where that Hinterland really does provide some context there. So, there are various things, I'm not going to labour these, you will see these at some point, but this sense of actually the language that we have and the vocabulary that we are focused on. Again, I pulled on science, but actually there are subject-specific vocabulary in everything that we do. But actually then really focusing on that and making sure that our children go away with clear understandings of the language that we are using. We've got these challenges. So I've talked about something that's not part of the national curriculum that absolutely should, from a moral and values position, be taught, that we need our children, young people to understand about climate change, or else we're going to be in a little bit more of a predicament in years to come. But I walk into my classroom in the morning, I am met with children that have not had breakfast, I've met children that do not have the right clothing, the right equipment, that have been up all night, that have been carers for parents. I've got, children. I'm going to Bangkok next week to speak to some teachers there, and I was saying to them, tell me about the problems that you have in these schools. And actually they used a phrase that I've never heard before, but it was posh neglect. And these are children that are going to private schools, but actually their needs are not being met at home. So we as the teachers have got something to do with that, haven't we? Overcoming misconceptions and preconceptions. It takes ages, because those misconceptions make so much sense to those children and young people, that to be able to get them to believe and buy into what they should be, it takes time. We know that our curriculum is stuffed full. Okay? So how do we deal with meeting all of those? And actually what we also know is that when we get to whatever stage, whether that's early years, key stage 1, key stage 2, going into secondary, that we don't know what the quality of maybe science teaching has been like. Okay, there are sometimes your maths and English probably quite secure. All those other subjects, we've not got confidence base necessarily that we see there. So there's all sorts of things that we have to deal with. So, just we know that there's a worry about climate change, and it's international. We see it here as well. So, and the reason that I highlight this is partly you will have children that will come from various places around the globe in your classroom, or have families there. We've got to be mindful of the crisis that is facing them. It's all about this. As I've mentioned, we've got all the good stuff, all the things you want to do, all of the additional bits and pieces, but we've got that on this side. How do we deal with the attainment, the accountability, EL, safeguarding, all of those things that we mentioned? You're going to go, I really hope you stay in the teaching profession. It's fabulous. But we know that the reality is that there is a retention crisis. Okay? How do we balance those? And I do think there's something here about thinking about this picture. How do we manage to do that core knowledge, and how do we do it in a way that enables the context and the lives of those children and young people to be made better? So there's something in that. If you have a little look, there is so much about hope and education being a real driver and a medium for being able to do that. It's really important that you hold on to. You will have come into teaching. There are a number of people in this room who said at interview, I want to make a difference to children and young people's lives. Okay? And that can be really difficult to hold on to when you've got all of those other things that I mentioned at the hard bit. But that's why you're there, and that's why it's important that you come back to through what I'm teaching, through the way I'm doing it, how can I make sure that that happens? Good teachers can make such a difference. You're in a very, very powerful position. But what I want to leave you with is this. It's not about the absence of struggle, because you are going to have them, but it's about having that depth and that courage to keep going throughout it. The challenges that we face in education are not going to go away. So we can't use them as an excuse. We can't say, but we have so many children with SEND, we've got some attainment issues, we've got attendance issues. We know that, and they're going to remain. It's a wicked problem. But what you need to do is to hold on to that purpose and what you can do, and actually push through that to continue to make that difference. I think that's it. Thank you.